All right, let's get started. We have a packed agenda, so I want to make sure we start on time. Thank you all so much for joining us today on our February member webinar on cybersecurity. With that, I will turn it over to CTAA's Executive Director, Scott Bogren.
Hello, everyone. Welcome today, and appreciate your taking some time out of your busy schedules to join us for what we think is a really important topic. And just some housekeeping notes. We have three presenters. They're going to go and please drop questions into the chat box. And Taylor and L'Oreal from my colleagues here at CTAA will be picking those up, and we'll make sure those all get addressed. They'll make sure that the speakers hear read the questions and go from there. We are in webinar mode here with the audience. The topic kind of speaks for itself, but I wanted to give a little bit of context before we get into our guests. And our guest, Terry Page, is with Concord Area Transit in Concord, New Hampshire, and her presence with us will be self-explanatory here in just a moment. We also have Scott Belcher from SFB Consulting. Scott's an acknowledged kind of expert in cybersecurity for transit systems. He's done a lot of work with the Mineta Transportation Institute, Transportation Research Board. We sent some of his materials to everyone who registered ahead of time, but he really has some good ideas about the basics. And Scott and I have had some good conversations about kind of right sizing some of what needs to happen to smaller transit agencies, to the kind of members we have. And last but not least is Todd Chalet. He's a risk advisor with Lakenan Insurance. And cyber insurance is a critical piece to all this. It's one thing to protect our agencies through good IT practices and policies and cybersecurity policies, but we heavily recommend at CTAA that as well our members are engaged in getting proper cyber insurance in case, because we all work in a business where there's all sorts of in cases. I was trying to think about how to introduce this, and I kind of came to the point where I thought, it's hard enough to be a small transit manager in an era where we've got a pandemic. It's hard to find drivers. The supply chain issues are keeping us from replacing our vehicles on any normal schedule. I can't tell you how many CTA members in the management level are telling me I end up driving right now because I need to make these vital trips happen. And in the middle of all that, we have these criminals who are engaged in a very high technology methods of interrupting the important work we do. And they are criminals. My IT department here at CTA tells me daily we are fending off these types of attacks, and that it literally never ends. And I think that speaks a lot to the reason why Todd's here to talk about insurance, because all it takes is one slip up. And the other thing to keep in mind too is we all used to think, and we've read about big metropolitan transit agencies in major cities that have had these kinds of attacks. And many of us maybe took a little bit of comfort in the idea that, well, they wouldn't arrive at my door. And our first speaker here, Terry Page, her agency's been a longtime member of CTAA. Thank you, Terry. And also really is very representative of what many of you in the audience are. A transit operation that's connected to a community action agency that started with the guise of making sure and providing access to seniors and people with disabilities, doing the kind of work that the vast majority of CTA members does, and never thought one day would be the victim of one of these attacks. So Terry and I have spoken, and I welcome, and just if you wouldn't mind, give the participants here an understanding of what happened and the amount of difficulty that it's created in doing the work that you're here to do, which is connect people with the trips they're going.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I think I've said 3 or 4 different times through this conversation leading up to this that I will do anything I can to make sure that nobody else ends up where I am right now. So that's really what my purpose here is to say, as much as you think it can't happen to you, it can happen to you. We were pretty secure in our little niche here in Concord, thinking that they're going after the big guys, and this is going to be, we're too small on the food chain in order to tickle anybody's feelers for wanting to do this to us. And surprise, we came into work one day in early November, and my dispatcher started up as she normally does at 5 in the morning. Everything was great, had her computer up, doing all the dispatching. And by 10 minutes to 7, the computers were all dead. There was no communication with anything anywhere. And we had our IT department frantically going around unplugging computers from the internet, trying to keep it from spreading to individual computers throughout the agency. So we got hit with a malware attack, which was a ransomware. And luckily it doesn't appear that they took any of our data, but they locked it up so that nobody can get to it, basically. And they wanted a lot of money, more money than we could afford as a community action program. And we had to basically start from scratch. The entire agency had to rebuild our entire online presence, our way of interacting, connections to all of our, we have 100 and something programs here right now, and many have very different reporting programs that they have to connect to get to their reports and all of the other pieces that go into doing everyday work. Those all had to be recreated. There was a whole bunch of verifications and authentications that had to be repeated, which was time consuming and expensive. We lost connectivity we were in the process of transitioning our server-based scheduling software over to a cloud-based version of the same software. And talk about the perfect storm and ironic timing. The morning before this malware attack hit, I had an email from the company saying, "You are next on the list. You're going to be migrated in the next week. Let's make a date to do this migration." Malware attack hit the next day. I lost everything. The entire database, the entire server, the server was not able to be resurrected. The IT department here was able to rescue most of the broader agency data and the broader agency files, which was fabulous. We got all of that back. But I couldn't get any of my scheduling software back. And that was 10 years worth of data that was gone. So yeah, if you think you're secure, please double check. That's truly the lesson here. We were doing backups, but the backup was to another server based within the agency. So the backup was also corrupted, and we weren't able to rescue that from the other server that we were using. We were so flying under the radar that we had no idea that this could potentially happen to an agency of our size. And as Scott mentioned, I hear all the time, well, why would they pick on us? We do good things for people. We provide services. We're working with vulnerable populations. How could they hit us? Well, they don't have a whole lot of ethics. They're criminals. That's what they're just looking for, the bottom line money, and wherever they can get it, that's what they're going to do. So, in terms of our size and where we are in the pool, we're a 5311 rural system. I do about 79,000 rides right now. Prior to the pandemic, we were a little bit higher than that, but not a whole lot. We were about 85 to 90,000 rides a year. Most of that is 5311 funded service through our fixed route here in Concord. But we also have 3 demand response routes here in Concord, and then we have 5 demand response buses that operate throughout Belknap and Merrimack counties. And those are all 5310 funded. So those are our 2 funding streams, 5311 and 5310 with local funds. A big piece of what I've been doing besides rebuilding our scheduling software is convincing all of our partners that everything is okay. There was a lot of fear and a lot of concern around what's happening to my client's data and what's happening to the information that you and I have shared. And it's a lot of rebuilding that trust issue as well, to assure everybody that we're back on stable ground and everything's going to be okay going forward. So,
Terry, characterize for the audience the time and resources consumed after the fact in just trying to get back up to speed where, I mean, you guys are doing, like many of the folks on the line here, dialysis trips that have to happen tomorrow and the day after and the day after.
Yep.
The amount of just work and resources to respond to this.
It's been pretty staggering. I'm abundantly grateful for the team that I have here. My crew is amazing and has done everything I think humanly possible to make sure that everybody is continuing to go where they need to go. But when I say we were dead in the water, we were literally, we had paper manifests that we had printed the night before for that day's service, the day that the malware hit. And we had to, within the space of that day, figure out how we were going to get the buses out the following morning. So we had to come up with a way of collecting rides that had already been called in, that we had no record of in a lot of places. We had to figure out how we were going to coordinate those rides and get them onto paper in a way that the drivers are going to be able to use them. It's literally been months worth of work just to get back to somewhat normal. I have my scheduling is now being done back in a version of the software we were using before, which is abundantly helpful. We're very grateful for that. I still don't have connectivity in terms of my mobile, the databases, but not the databases, excuse me, the tablets that the drivers were using. We still don't have connectivity for those yet. I have not been able to do billing and do some of my data reports that I need since October. So I have just this past week gotten the new scheduling software up to a point where I can backfill rides to be able to run the reports that I need to run. So now my team is looking at doing probably at least 2 solid weeks worth of data entry to be able to just get to the point where I can start doing my invoicing again and start doing rides. And it's February. So we until about the first week of January, we were doing all of our dispatching and scheduling on spreadsheets in Microsoft 365 and doing and getting those emailed out to drivers so that they could use them on the road. It's staggering.
Yes. Have you even tried to put it on as finely a point as saying it's cost us X amount?
I haven't even had a chance to quantify that, to be honest with you. I'm on salary, so it's one of those things where I work until I go home, right? Yes. Overtime in terms of my regular hourly staff, it's probably up at least 20%, 25% for them being able to put in the extra time that they need to do the work that still needs to get done. I luckily haven't lost any staff because of this. They've all really pulled the weight that needed to get done and hung in there with me. But there were some days where it was a little testier here, no doubt about it.
I cannot imagine. Last thing, your partners, the state DOT and others, I think it's a good chance you've told me how helpful and they've been. It'd be good for the folks to hear too that these partnerships that we all create, and you never know when you're going to have to really lean on those, and you guys certainly had to. Yep,
we New Hampshire DOT has been amazing. They've opened up channels for us to access technical assistance funds to be able to get some of the data entry work done that we need to get done, set us up with consultants to be able to help us figure out how we navigate this and what it looks like. They've been very helpful with that and incredibly patient, knowing that what we're going through, we just can't produce the numbers that we were able to very easily before because they're there. We just don't know how to get them out to be able to put them in report form. In terms of additional costs that you mentioned before, the entire agency, we had to bring on temporary IT staff for, I think they were here for almost 3 weeks, cleaning individual computers, setting up we had our conference room turned into a war room, basically, where they had all of the agency computers lined up, cleaning them, putting on new programs, getting everything set up again. I don't have that dollar amount, but you can imagine what IT costs are these days.
It's
and
significant.
3 weeks worth of it, that would be pretty significant. So, and that's not saying what was spent behind the scenes, getting us set back up on our new platforms and all of that stuff. So, yeah.
Well, I was very hesitant to ask you to share because I hated you having to kind of relive all of that again, but much appreciating your time to come and be clear for the folks here about what is at stake and that we're all in varying levels of vulnerability here. And so thank you so much, Terry.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Yeah, if you have questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll make sure questions are directed to Terry as they come in. And kind of like now that we've scared all of you into what can happen, you probably are all very rightfully saying, what can I do? What should I be doing? Am I doing enough? And if you're not asking those questions, then I don't think you were truly listening to what Terry had to say. And we've got both Scott and Todd here kind of to talk about some ways and steps to be taken. And I think many of you are already taking a lot of these steps, okay? But it's good to recommit and double back and ensure, it's that old trust but verify kind of piece to it. So I'll turn it over to Scott Belcher now, who can talk a little bit about kind of what agencies should be doing. Scott.
Well, thank you, Scott, for having me. I really appreciate it. And Terry, you're a rock star. I can't tell you how impressed I am, and knowing how difficult what you've gone through has been. So you're amazing. And you violated one of the major rules of cybersecurity. It's the Fight Club rule. What goes on in Fight Club stays in Fight Club. And what generally happens in the cybersecurity world is we don't talk about it, and that's a problem. So thank you for being willing to talk about it, because it really does help other organizations, and it's really important that you do that. And I really appreciate that. And then I guess the third observation before I kind of dive in is I know the makeup of CTAA, but there are a number of very large organizations that have gone through exactly what you're going through. I mean, SEPTA had all the same problems you talked about, doing payroll by hand, not being able to communicate with, not being able to use the internet with their staff, not being able to communicate digitally with their customers. So it doesn't just happen to small agencies, it happens to big agencies as well. So don't feel like you're alone. And in fact, the stats are there's been 186% increase in assaults on transit agency in the last year. So Scott asked me to do a couple of things. One is to kind of talk a little bit about some things that you might be able to do. So Taylor, can you put the first slide up? All right. So I have two slides that I'm going to share with you. So I'm here on behalf of the Moneta Transportation Institute. And a series of colleagues and I have done a number of reports around transit cybersecurity. And so these are there. These are on the screen. You can just go to the Mineta Transportation website, and they're easily accessible. And I'll just mention two of them. The first one is the transit industry prepared for the cyber revolution? That study came out in 2020, right 2 months before SolarWinds. And SolarWinds was kind of the big breach that became very, very public. And then there's been a series of other big attacks since then. And we surveyed over a third of the transit agencies in the country, so pretty remarkable. And I know many of you responded, and so I appreciate that, because we have really the most robust database on cyber preparedness. And I think I'm gonna just give you a couple of statistics and see where you fall out in them, because it's really pretty important. So first of all, we found out that more than 40% of transit agencies don't have a cybersecurity policy. If you have a cybersecurity policy, that's pretty important to start with. Less than 50% had log maintenance schedules. Do you know what log maintenance schedules are critical, and you should know how long you're going to keep your data, and when you're going to get rid of it, because as Terry talked about, she had to rebuild everything. And if you're keeping your data, you're managing your data, and you're managing it safely, you can go back to the point of the hack and only have to rebuild from that point forward. And that can be very helpful to you and can save you a lot of time and a lot of money. Interestingly, almost 80% of the survey respondents thought that they were prepared for a cyber attack, but then only 40% thought that they had the resources to respond. If you went to another more sophisticated industry, you'd find that you wouldn't get an 80%, yeah, we're ready. You'd get a 30 or 40% we're prepared, which is probably far more normal. And then I think that I'm going to stop with that, but the couple of other things that were really stunning to me was that most organizations roughly 50% of the organizations didn't have crisis management plans, didn't have crisis response plans, didn't have, just the basic, what I call security or risk management hygiene. They weren't doing training. And cybersecurity training is critical, and doing it every year for every person in the staff, because what Terry needs and what a receptionist need are two different things, but they both need training. And Taylor, if you can put the other slide up. So TSA has put out these five just, I call them good hygiene, but I think they're really important topics that every transit agency should be familiar with. And so first is understanding the Nist framework. Well, that might be a little esoteric. The Nist framework is simply the Bible for cybersecurity. It's kind of what every assessment tool, every evaluation, every protection framework is based on what's called the Nist framework. And so some familiarity with that is important. Every organization can have a password policy, and you should have it. It's simple. I mean, I know it's a pain in the ass remembering them all, but if you don't do it, you're going to get hacked. You ought to understand phishing and spam trends and how to message about that. My guess is that somebody sent Terry's organization sent an email that they said was from Terry asking her to do something. And Terry responded because the email address looked like it was an email address from somebody in the organization she knew. That's how it happens. It doesn't happen by big, big devious, plans. It happens by going through the easiest open door, and the easiest open door is email. And so you need to know how people are getting into your email, because once they're into your email, then they can get into your finance records, then they can get into your personnel records, then you're in trouble. Because what happens often is they'll threaten to take those personnel records, those personal records, and put them in the dark web. And that makes those records available to a lot of criminals, not just the criminal who happened to pick on you that day. Understanding what your team needs and doesn't need is really important. So not everybody needs access to the same things. In fact, you don't want there to be access to the same things. You want to make sure you know exactly who gets access to what. That will, one, help delimit your risks, and two, help you understand what to do. And then finally, and this is really key, is you got to report when you're breached, when you're hacked. I mean, so just take a step back, you're getting hacked. Every organization on this call is getting hacked multiple times a day or trying to get hacked. And I mean, that's a fact of life. And it's not whether you get hacked, it's when you get hacked. And hopefully, through webinars like this and other things, you'll realize that there are things that you can do. So my colleagues and I are now wrapping up another study that is looking at your vendor community and how they can help you. And there are ways that you can leverage your vendor community to help you. They play a key role, and if they're employing good cyber hygiene, that cyber hygiene passes on to you. It's like you do a good thing and it passes forward. If they're not practicing good hygiene, then in fact, that also reflects on you, and that's not a good thing. So we went deep with about 12 or 15 vendors that represent, that work for most of you in some fashion, I suspect. And so we were able to really get some good findings. So a couple of key findings, and this is applicable to you as much, probably even actually the findings we got from the vendors were really are applicable for you all. The first is understanding the difference between security and risk. So security is preventing something from happening. And it's trying to make sure that you're never breached. And risk is recognizing that you're likely to get breached and managing that risk. And one of the things that's not happened is many of you are really good at security management because you have to be. It's your job. And so what we have to do is we have to bring the practices that you have on the security side and apply them to cybersecurity. Cybersecurity needs to become part of your enterprise risk management portfolio, so that when Terry meets with her executive team and they look at, so what are the biggest risks that we're dealing with and how are we going to deal with them and how do we prioritize them? And then they reprioritize them 2 months later when things change. Cyber needs to be there. It's not the only priority, and you can't go from a pendulum of not caring about cybersecurity to only caring about cybersecurity. You can't afford it, first of all, but second of all, it's just doesn't make sense. So that's a huge issue. Another big issue is becoming sufficiently knowledgeable about cybersecurity to get the procurement process right. So procurement is key. You're going to be one, we farm out a lot of our work, a shocking amount if you look at the dollars spent and how much of it goes to consultants. And so understanding how to ask for cybersecurity help, understanding how to make sure that your consultants provide the right types of security is really key. And what we see now is we see a lot of people who don't know what they're doing asking for a lot of stuff, getting consultants to ask for a lot of stuff, not using all the stuff that they're asking for, not even knowing what they're asking for, and just driving the prices up. And Todd can attest to that. I mean, and I'm sure he'll touch this. So understanding that will really help you manage your costs, but also protect you. And then the last one is there's not an easy answer for. And that's that technology and hardware don't align right now. We're in a business of keeping people safe. And so our equipment has to work 99.9999% of the time. That's why we build it. And we build it to last a long time. And software doesn't work that way. And so aligning software with hardware is really hard. And if you're not having hard conversations with your vendors now, you're going to be. Because you're going to say to them, well, wait a minute, I bought this piece of equipment for 15 years and you're telling me it's not secure. What do I do about it? And their answer is the hardware will last for 15 years and do exactly what I said it would do, but I can't guarantee that the software will, and I don't know if I can update the software. Well, that's a tough conversation to have. And it doesn't make anybody feel good. So, so what do you do? I mean, I've talked about a number of things. I think, so if I were to leave you with kind of two big thoughts. One thought is cybersecurity is everybody's responsibility and it needs to be part of your overall organizational culture. Terry needs to brief her board on it. The board needs to be trained on it. Terry needs to be trained on it. Her IT people need to be trained on it. Her receptionist needs to be trained on it. It is not an IT function, nor is it a security function. It has to report into the executive team. It needs to be that level of priority. And then the last thing I would suggest in terms of recommendations is that it can be overwhelming, just the whole kind of trying to understand, excuse me, sorry. I mean, we're watching what's going on in the news right now with Russia and Ukraine, and all they talk about is cybersecurity, right? And Terry said, we're just helping people. Why would they go after us? This is not Ukraine. And she was right. These are criminals. And so it can be daunting. And so the best advice I can give you is not to put your head in the sand, to hire a consultant or have have a good IT person do an assessment of your cybersecurity maturity. Once you've done that, and that's not a very expensive proposition, once you've done that, then you can go into a capital planning mode, in a risk management mode, and you can say, okay, well, I've got this amount of money. How am I going to spend it? And what am I going to spend it on this year? And what am I going to spend it on next year? And how is that going to change? And that, again, that's part of the management of this. And that's really key. If you need ideas about who might be able to help you with that, what kind of tools are out there, Scott will share my information with you, and I'm happy to be a facilitator. The last thing I'll leave you with is this administration has really paid a lot more attention to cybersecurity because of everything that's happened. So public rail, public transit, the rail side of transit has a TSA directive that's requiring it to do 4 things. It's requiring them to identify somebody who's their cybersecurity point 24/7. It's requiring them to report breaches within 24 hours. It's requiring them to do an assessment. It's requiring them to do a plan. So that's required, and that's like the top 30 transit agencies, because the top 30 are the biggest ones with rail. But it is highly recommended that every transit agency, every surface transportation agency do those. What that tells me is you should expect this to become a directive that applies to you in the not too distant future, because TSA is going to work its way down all critical infrastructure, and we are critical infrastructure. So there are a number of other indicators for why there's more coming. There's money in the infrastructure bill. The defense community has put in place some rules around procurement. And if it starts in the defense community and procurement, it always comes back to us. So it's coming. And so just expect more attention. The good news is right now there is a little bit of money associated with it. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn it back to Scott or to Todd, however Scott wants to do it. Thank you for your time. And again, Terry, you are a hero. Thank you. Todd, Scott, you're on mute.
Of course. Thanks. First and foremost, there's a lot to digest there, that a lot of important information. And Scott and I are talking about some scalable pieces of what he's doing for CTAA members in the future. So you can also look for a little bit more from both CTAA and Scott, ideally here for our membership base. Now, and you get to the next phase, right? Which is Scott had a lot of common sense pieces that we should all be exercising. Another one of those, of course, is insurance. And when we talk about risk management, every person listening to this webinar right now would never run a bus if it wasn't insured. And there's all sorts of risk management we do around that in terms of our driver training and things that make the core part of our business safe. This needs to be addressed similarly. And so I'm really happy that we could have Todd here to kind of give an example and talk about how that can work and kind of give you all some guidelines on that. So Todd, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Scott. And I'll say it, I never get used to this presenting to a group of people I can't see. I don't think I was cut out for being a TV star. Anyway, thank you guys for having me today, and happy to talk to you about cyber insurance. And certainly cyber insurance and risk management go hand in hand, and more every day. I think companies are beginning to realize how much they need to go hand in hand, to Scott's point. So I'll start with some statistics to impress upon you the severity of what we're dealing with and the frequency that situations like Terry ran into are happening. In 2020, the average total cost of a data breach in the transportation industry was $3.75 million. And last year, a ransomware attack occurred every 11 seconds. And the average ransom demand last year was $2.5 million. However, the average ransom payment was $210,000. So, that should show you the severity of what we're dealing with. And like Terry mentioned, and both and Scott mentioned, no organization is immune to this risk. Doesn't matter if you're doing something good for the community. It doesn't matter that you're not the big bad corporate America. Everybody's a target, except perhaps maybe if you're just selling pretzels out front of a ball game for cash, that maybe I could be talked into you're not a risk there. But for the most part, every business is at risk of a cyber attack. And another question I commonly get before I'll move on is that I store my information in the cloud, therefore I don't think I need cyber insurance. And that's a misconception that I hear a lot of times from insureds, that somehow absolves them of a cybersecurity risk. And so certainly, even if you're storing information in the cloud, you'd still have a cyber risk worth insuring. So I'm going to move forward now. Scott asked me to talk about a couple of different things. So I'm going to give you maybe some background about the insurance markets and how quickly we got to the somewhat chaotic and volatile insurance marketplace we're in now. You know, I think of everybody in the audience and being in the transportation industry and what sort of, you know, insurance issues you had to deal with just insuring auto these days, and how difficult it's been to insure your businesses. And now cyber is definitely caught up to being one of the most difficult lines of coverage out there. And then I'll move on to just the process of procuring cyber insurance and touch on 3 different issues during that process that can help you guys, and you guys can take away as you go into your next renewal and buy cyber insurance. So I'd say within, you know, even the last 5 years, probably even sooner, cyber insurance started, or not started, but even as recent as that time period was kind of just something that was an add-on. It was really, a broker would bring it, and, you know, maybe it was something tacked on to a general liability policy or whatever package you were buying. It was relatively cheap. The risk was nowhere near where it is today. And an organization could, you know, just check the box and buy it because it was relatively cheap, and, you know, wipe their hands clean and come back to it the next renewal. And what we've seen, though, is that the level of risk has increased dramatically over the past couple of years. But at the same time, organizations and companies haven't really brought their cybersecurity up to par with the level of risk out there. And so what that's caused is insurance companies now are forcing organizations to bring that level of cybersecurity policies and procedures, tools in place, and forcing them to catch up with the level of risk that's out there. And the other thing that insurance companies are doing, that I'm sure if anybody's been through this process has seen, their rates are increasing dramatically. I've had a renewal this year that was 400% of what it was last year. Co-insurance requirements, deductible increases. I bet that some of you have gotten non-renewed because insurance companies are leaving the line of business altogether. It's really just been kind of a chaotic marketplace. And I don't know if, I guess it remains to be seen that all these changes that underwriters are making and these insurance companies' proprietary way of underwriting cyber risk, you know, until we see some success in what they're doing in regaining profitability, I think won't really see if the market levels out or, you know, the level of volatility levels out until a lot of those controls start showing some success. So that's kind of a recap of where we are today. Move on to, I mentioned procuring cyber insurance and a couple of key points during that process. And what Scott talked about and buying cyber insurance, they go hand in hand. So risk management, like I mentioned, is paramount right now when considering buying cyber insurance and making your organization an insurable risk when an insurance company looks at you. And I thought about the you know, the audience, and I think maybe it's comparable to, and Scott mentioned this earlier, I think, comparing it to what you guys are doing to manage your fleet safety. So if you think about what you guys are doing and collaborating with insurance companies, maybe you don't think of it necessarily as collaborating with insurance companies, but you have in place safe driving practices, driver training, running MVRs, vehicle maintenance programs, all these different things you're doing to essentially mitigate the risk of an auto claim. You know, those sort of practices need to be put in place on the cyber side as well. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to prevent claims, obviously. I mean, a cyber insurance can be there as a backstop when and if it does happen. but everybody doesn't want that to happen. So you're trying to put those certain policies and procedures in place so that it doesn't happen. We start the conversation with risk management with our insureds a lot of times at the very beginning with 3 things that insurance companies are requiring pretty much in order to be an insurable risk. And those are multi-factor authentication. When you think of when you're logging into your bank account and it sends you a text message with a code, that's a good example of multi-factor authentication. The next is employee training. And Terry and Scott both talked about this. And employee training is critically important right now, and establishing a culture of cybersecurity at your organization goes hand in hand with that. I think Microsoft is quoted in saying that about 90% of cyber incidents could be prevented with good employee training. And then the last is an incident response plan. Having a plan in place, so when a cyber incident occurs, your organization is ready to run at the same pace as your breach response team that you're assigned to with your cyber insurance company. These guys, the attorneys, the data scientists, the breach response IT professionals are ready to go. They're doing this all day long. And your ability to run along with them can save your organization a significant amount of time and money in the event of a claim. So those 3 things are critically important. And fortunately, a lot of brokers and insurance companies are providing introductory or discounts or even free tools to implement some of these things. So if you're not being introduced that from your broker or your insurance company, please ask what's available from your insurance company to improve your cybersecurity posture and improve your cyber hygiene as an organization, because it's definitely in the best interest of your cyber insurance carrier to make you as secure as possible. So there are resources out there available. I'll touch on applications, and within the past couple of years, applications have gotten extremely more difficult for organizations to complete. In the past, applications were as simple as what's the name of your organization and what's your website. And now we're seeing 3, 4, 5 pages, supplementals, attestations, really a lot of different requirements and pretty technical in nature. So not only are the insurance companies, asking for more information, they're asking for technical information at that. So we're urging people to involve their IT teams, involve their outsourced IT teams to make sure you're completing your application as completely and accurately as possible. The worst case scenario is you complete an application and maybe make some assumptions or guesses. And then in the event of a claim, the opposite is true. And now you're dealing with an insurance company that may be denying a claim because what you put on an application isn't necessarily true. The last thing I'll touch on is coverages and policies comparisons. And certainly an important part of cyber insurance policy is aligning your expectations in the event of a claim with what your policy is actually going to cover. So and part of that, when we're getting quotes back from insurance companies, there's still inefficiencies in cyber insurance right now to where policy A, B, and C are not consistent with one another, right? So we're comparing apples and oranges to some degree, and strongly urge people to not go down to the premium and buy based on the premium. You want to make sure that you understand what's in the policy and that it's covering what you're expecting it to cover. And, a broker should be able to help you, align those 2 things. So I think, all in all, this is certainly, I would say, cyber insurance and cyber risk management are at this point as important as any line of coverage that you're going to buy. it can be an extremely impactful, damaging event to any size organization, certainly small businesses, and the level at which they're able to withstand a cyber attack can be, it's a challenging, as Terry can admit, it's a very challenging process. And unfortunately, some small organizations can't withstand a cyber attack. So, having a plan in place, having a cyber insurance policy in place is, I believe, critically important. Not only do you have with the cyber insurance policy the funding that comes with it, but you have the roadmap to remediation and recovery that comes with a cyber insurance policy. You have somebody to call in the event of an incident, and then you have the team associated with that cyber insurance company to bring you back up to online and get you back up to speed. So if certainly if anybody has any more questions about cyber insurance, I'm happy to answer those. Please feel free to reach out to me. I think Scott's sharing our information, and thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much, everyone. We just lost Scott to another meeting, but we definitely thank him for joining us as well. So thank you guys so much for your presentations. We will jump into the question and answers now. We definitely got a lot. So the first one is for the group. And one of the questions that we had was, would you all recommend CTAA members engage in scenario planning exercises where they test data recovery and redundancy in technology? So what are your thoughts about scenario planning, data recovery, and the redundancy in our technology?
Yes.
Maybe Scott, if you want to go first.
Yes. Yes is the answer. Go ahead, Todd.
I completely echo what you're going to say. And I was just going to add that some insurance companies will even review your incident response plan, your scenario planning, and provide some thoughts and best practices on what you've decided. Again, they are there to help you. They should not be seen as a bad person. They should be seen as a collaborative partner in this, and making you as resilient as possible.
And part of your training really should be scenario planning. It should be doing, doing run-throughs and making sure that you've practiced for it. You know what to do. One thing I did mean to mention is the FTA is currently developing an assessment tool for small to mid-sized transit agencies that will enable them to use an interactive PDF and do a pretty quick baseline assessment of their organization. That should probably be available in the next kind of 3 to 4 months is what I expect. It'll be free, be open source. And so there'll be a lot of different variations on it, but it's a good baseline. It's based on CISA, based on the what's called the CRR, which is the cybersecurity response, resilience response. So, anyways, keep your eye out for that. That would be a good place to start. There was a question in the thing asking me about the Bart example. So just very quickly, so Bart was doing an extension to Milpus. They were about to launch it, and they had recently hired some cybersecurity staff, the luxury of being a large transit agency, and those staff actually went and ran down all the IDs of all the switches. There were 1,000 switches. Turned out that all the switches had been pirated. They'd been taken out of operation. There were Cisco switches. They'd been taken out of operation at the end of life, taken to recycling. And Cisco has a wonderful cradle to grave management process. So the foreign nation took the switches at the recycling facility, took them wherever they took them, and reprocessed them, repackaged them, and then sold them on the internet as new. They also put in chips so that they could get a backdoor access into the system. And this turned into an international criminal investigation that's currently ongoing and implicated close to 20 transit agencies. So it's serious. I guess the reason for telling the story is that, yeah, I guess I probably emphasize that your biggest risk opportunity is probably going to be through the internet and through your email, but there are other opportunities as well where sophisticated criminals are trying to get access. And this was a a hostile nation. This was not a criminal. I mean, I guess they're the same thing, but this was somebody who really wanted to get access and understand what Bart was doing. I don't know what they would do with the data, but anyways, it's just I just wanted to respond to that question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Terry, we actually just got a question for you that I want to make sure we highlight before we leave. Were any of your vendors impacted? This person is looking to make a list of vendors whom they are working with to verify and have the proper levels of security in place. But in general, I mean, were your other partners or vendors impacted?
No, luckily we didn't get any reports of anybody else getting hit with the same kind of attack. So we were relieved by that. More of the fear of that happening, right? So because our email was compromised, we had to do some scrambling in the first couple of days to figure out how we were going to communicate with everybody and what that was going to look like. And we had to quickly make sure that we had the security in place to keep those lines of communication open. We do a significant amount of work with both federal and state governments in terms of funding for the larger community action program and for my program as well. So we have different kinds of invoicing and online kind of transaction programs that were shut down and then had to be set back up again and reauthorized and go through the whole authentication process. I have a hard time saying that one, sorry. So that took a lot of time and a lot of resources and back and forth. So there was a significant delay in our ability to invoice and receive payments for that kind of stuff. So those were the types of kind of vendor partner challenges that we had in being able to get back on our feet and get reconnected with everybody.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. And I think this is a really good question because I don't even know the answer. Scott, is there a difference between an ease of cloud-based attacks and server-based attacks? Is one easier than the other? Is one more likely to occur than the other?
That's a good question. I think there's, I think we have in our industry a preference for on-prem, but I think that's changing as we move into the 21st century, and you really do have greater protection when you're in the cloud. It's easier to segment. It's easier to back it up and back it up in separate ways. So I think the natural evolution, the cloud is far more secure than we're able to keep our on-prem systems because we just can't keep up.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, thank you all so much again for agreeing to speak to our members today and with us. It's been so informative. I've learned so much. I think I have 3 pages of notes. So thank you all so much. I know our members really appreciate it. Before I let all of you go, I just wanted to highlight 2 things. This topic is really important to us at CTAA. So for those who will be attending our expo, we will be doing a workshop on this topic. Please let me know if you have other questions about cybersecurity. It's something that we will definitely want to incorporate into our expo workshop. And finally, we have our March member webinar that will be released next week. As we all know, next month is Women's History Month. And so we will be doing a webinar on attracting and retaining women in transit. So we hope you can all join us for that. Registration will be coming out next week. And thank you all so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.